On July 4, 1944, near the Mont Castre heights in Normandy, Private Barney H. Prosser found himself commanding a rifle company whose officers had been lost, together with 2 leaderless platoons from another company. This was not a promotion ceremony. It was an emergency measured in minutes. The official history records that the evening advance continued, and Prosser was one of the men who made that possible. How could a private take control of a force far above his rank after its visible command structure had disappeared? The answer was not that American infantrymen were immune to fear, confusion, or collapse. They were not. The answer was that some authority, information, and familiar work had already been distributed below the officer level. Wartime manuals named immediate successors. Non-commissioned officers performed parts of command every day. Orders, signals, and repeated drills gave several men enough of the plan to continue an action. When those pieces survived, a unit had a chance to rebuild control. When they did not, the system failed like any other. Begin with the wartime rifle company described in Field Manual 7-10. On paper it contained a company headquarters, 3 rifle platoons, and a weapons platoon. The company commander translated the battalion mission into tasks for those elements, but the command group also included a second in command, a first sergeant, communications personnel, and messengers. The manual did not leave the first emergency to guesswork. The second in command was expected to keep abreast of the tactical situation and replace the company commander if the commander became a casualty. One level lower, a rifle platoon contained a small command group and 3 rifle squads. The platoon leader directed it. The platoon sergeant, an experienced non-commissioned officer, watched control, discipline, movement, ammunition, the rear, and the flanks. The manual called him second in command and stated that he replaced the platoon leader when the officer was absent or became a casualty. At squad level the pattern repeated on a smaller scale. The squad leader controlled the group. The assistant squad leader helped prevent straggling, supervised movement and ammunition, maintained contact, and took command in the squad leader's absence. This chart describes an intended organization, not the strength every unit possessed in combat. But it shows something important. The Army expected immediate command to survive the loss of 1 man. The layers also solved different problems. Company command linked the unit to the battalion plan and supporting weapons. Platoon command converted that plan into routes, formations, and tasks for 3 squads. Squad command handled the closest decisions of observation, fire, movement, and contact. A casualty therefore did not erase one identical job at every level. It removed a particular part of a connected system, and the designated successor first had to preserve that level's immediate function. A succession rule mattered only if the successor could do useful work. Non-commissioned officers were prepared less by a single lesson about taking command than by the duties they already performed. A platoon sergeant helped control direction and pace. He checked ammunition, watched the men behind the leading squads, maintained discipline, and stayed close enough to the platoon leader to understand the immediate situation. A squad leader trained his men, interpreted the platoon order on the ground, controlled fire and movement, and kept contact with neighboring squads. The assistant squad leader practiced parts of the same job from another position. Training reinforced those relationships. Men rehearsed how to assemble, disperse, cross exposed ground, respond to signals, establish security, shift fire, and report what they saw. Repetition did not turn them into machines. It reduced the number of unfamiliar decisions arriving at once. The unit also divided action among several people. The automatic rifleman understood his supporting role. Scouts watched the ground ahead. Riflemen watched flanks and adjacent men. Messengers knew where information had to travel. If the squad leader fell, the squad did not forget that some men were covering, others were moving, and everyone had to remain connected. The assistant inherited an action already in progress. None of this made every soldier interchangeable. An inexperienced replacement could know the drill and still lack trust, terrain knowledge, or judgment. The system created degrees of redundancy, not a second copy of every leader. Its value was narrower. Someone nearby had already watched the work, performed part of it, and possessed a recognized starting point from which to restore control. Recognition mattered as much as competence. In an emergency, the men needed to know whose orders now counted, while the successor needed a practical way to make those orders visible. Moving to a useful position, contacting the next element, checking ammunition, assigning sectors, or sending a runner could all announce that control had been restored before a formal chain could be rebuilt. Succession also depended on information being shared before it was urgently needed. A useful order gave more than a direction to advance. It described the situation, the mission, the tasks of subordinate units, supporting fires, signals, and the location or intended movement of the commander. Platoon and squad leaders translated that larger order into ground their men could see. Information then moved through overlapping channels. Portable radios were fast but fragile, limited by batteries, range, terrain, and crowded nets. Runners carried context but could be delayed or lost. Hand signals were silent but reached only men who could see them. Observation showed what a message had missed. The strength was not any single device. It was overlap. If enough of the mission remained in several minds, the next leader did not begin with a blank map. He could announce control, recover contact, and continue the most immediate task. This explains why succession was more than a box on an organization chart. A successor who knew only his own last instruction could repeat an action after its purpose had vanished. A successor who understood the mission could change the route or sequence while still serving the same objective. The official history breakout and pursuit gives us a severe test of this system. On July 4, 1944, the 90th Infantry Division was fighting near the Mont Castre heights in Normandy. Flooded low ground, hedgerows, villages, and slopes restricted sight and movement. German observation and shell fire could separate units that looked close together on a map. The 359th Infantry was scheduled to resume its advance, but the morning did not produce a clean attack. Counter-battery fire began almost immediately. Subordinate commanders feared a counterattack. The regimental effort was delayed. When part of the regiment moved, German fire halted it, and the appearance of armored vehicles caused infantrymen to withdraw. Near dusk, the situation changed. Unit commanders rallied their men, and the 359th Infantry began moving again. The history says the regiment continued for nearly 2 miles and identifies 2 men as important to that advance, Captain Leroy R. Pond, a battalion commander, and Private Barney H. Prosser. Prosser's rank is why this incident matters. The history states that he assumed command of a rifle company after all of its officers had been lost. He also took control of 2 leaderless platoons from another company. The source does not preserve his words or give a minute-by-minute diagram. We should not invent either. What it establishes is already remarkable. During a renewed advance, a private gathered several leaderless elements under one center of control and helped keep them moving. Prosser later received the Distinguished Service Cross. Yet the same pages prevent us from turning this into a simple story of heroic improvisation. German fire had already damaged the organization that Prosser was trying to rebuild. One rifle company lost 60 men, many of them non-commissioned officers. Another had only its commander and fewer than 65 men remaining. A heavy weapons mortar platoon had been reduced to 18. Those numbers tell us what emergency command could and could not do. Prosser could give scattered men a recognized direction. He could not restore the officers, NCOs, communications, ammunition, or experience already lost. The regiment moved, but it moved through units whose formal chains had been torn apart. This was not proof that rank no longer mattered. It was proof that, under extreme pressure, the man able to establish control could become more important than the rank printed beside his name. The manuals had distributed duties and named successors. Battle had destroyed the neat sequence. Prosser bridged the gap between the design system and the force that actually remained. A second official history records the same problem in defense. During fighting at the Siegfried line in September 1944, Company K of the 109th Infantry faced a German counterattack. 2 platoons had become leaderless. Technical Sergeant Francis J. Clark, normally a squad leader, assumed command of both. The history states that he moved among the men under fire and encouraged them to hold. After he was wounded, he refused evacuation. His action was part of the service for which he received the Medal of Honor. Clark did not formally replace 2 platoon leaders in experience or information. He supplied an immediate center of authority when the position needed one. The larger offensive still suffered heavily and could not be rescued by local leadership alone. But at that threatened point, a squad leader restored enough control for 2 platoons to continue defending. These cases were exceptional because continuity was never automatic. When a leader disappeared, information could disappear with him. He might know that supporting fire was delayed, a boundary had changed, or a neighboring platoon had stopped. Timing could disappear as men waited to learn who was in charge. Confidence could disappear because soldiers responded not only to rank, but to a familiar voice and a reputation built over time. A successor could restore direction and still lack radio contact, ammunition, medical support, or a usable route. Replacements could fill authorized spaces without replacing the relationships that made a squad work. Heavy casualties among NCOs were especially damaging because they removed several layers of practical knowledge at once. The system therefore had a limit. It could preserve a local action when enough people, information, and routine survived. It could not manufacture fresh strength or reconstruct a destroyed network from nothing. 3 things had to survive the loss of a leader. First, the mission. Someone below him had to know what the unit was trying to accomplish, not merely the last movement it had been ordered to make. Second, control. A recognized person had to turn scattered reactions back into coordinated work, assign immediate tasks, and make his authority understood. Third, contact. The unit needed some connection to neighboring elements and higher headquarters, whether by radio, runner, signal, sight, or physical movement. A succession chart supplied a name. Training supplied familiar actions. Shared orders and overlapping communications supplied enough information to choose the next useful step. Remove any one of those pieces and the unit might still fight, but it was less likely to fight as a unit. Preserve all 3, and even a badly damaged force had a chance to recover direction before the enemy could exploit the empty space. American infantry sometimes kept fighting after its officers were gone because leadership had never existed only in the officers. Duties, information, and practiced routines were distributed downward before the crisis. The result was not invulnerability. It was a better chance that someone could restore mission, control, and contact. In the next file, we will examine another part of that continuity, How radios, runners, and visual signals carried command through a battlefield that kept breaking the network.